What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock, what you should be looking after for the future, and why tomorrow is going to be an absolutely massive day for the markets, for the economy, for the stock market, and Tesla stock going forward, because we have the big CPI report coming out. So I'm going to break down why on earth this is going to be such a big day for the markets, when is CPI, what the expectations are, and how this may affect the share price of Tesla and the economy going forward. Now, before I break anything down, before I get into any more details, I do have to mention a couple of things before starting real quick. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Don't take any of this as financial advice whatsoever. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. Not only benefits me, it benefits the entire Tesla community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below and in the description. If you stand up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed up to 12 free stocks, each worth up to $2,000. And the best part is, any of these 12 free stocks could be a free Tesla share, a free NEO share, or a mix of all of them. It's a limited time offer. The offer ends in just 3 days. Check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So looking at Tesla, this thing closed just slightly in the green, but overall the market was just very choppy and sideways as we had the Fed minutes come out. And overall, there was nothing really new that came out. As of right now, the market is just getting ready for that big CPI report. We had a slight sell-off near the end of the day, but it did not affect Tesla that much. And we did see some tickers be slightly green and others being slightly red as the day went on. Now, tomorrow is where the big expectations are coming for CPI. And this will have a very big effect on Tesla, believe it or not. Because if we look at the charts on the daily, you will notice that the last time we had that big CPI report was just about right here, very close to this date right here. Obviously, the whole market took a big hit on that day. Tesla actually held up for a couple of days after that. This was after September 13th. Then we had a big sell-off with the overall market after that. For SPY, it was a little bit different. If you watch the SPY, all right, I think it was like right here. The SPY had a massive gap down and a crash that happened on the day CPI came out when we missed on core CPI. And after that, we had a big drop that started to continue after that big date. So right here, you can clearly see how big this really is. It's very impactful for the markets because CPI affects what the Fed is going to be doing next. It affects whether or not the Fed is going to continue to be even more hawkish or not, and what the sentiment is for the markets. Jerome Powell and many other Fed officials may make new announcements based off the report, and that's why it's so important, because right now the Fed is really driving this economy and the markets going forward. So what's going to happen to Tesla? Well, right now we're kind of in the middle between support and resistance levels. If this thing breaks past 220, we could get a big rally to the upside. If this thing breaks below 215 and tries to end up dropping down to 210 and we don't hold that, we could end up retesting the low 200s. So we could go either way, but where we go is very dependent on the CPI report, and that's why I'm going to break it down now. So once again, it's at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. So that's when it's coming out tomorrow. Once again at 8:30. Please be very ready for this because the market is going to make a big move depending on what the data shows us. Now, right now, there are lots of expectations coming out from economists that it's going to be kind of hot. We might see it actually coming up a bit, but at the same time, there are other economists saying the opposite. So the important thing I learned is the fact that these expectations tend to be inaccurate, and they actually tend to not always be right. Remember last time it came out, everyone, or at least the majority of investors, were anticipating that core CPI and CPI would come down because we saw gas prices dropping, but ultimately CPI did come down, but core CPI, which is CPI excluding food and energy, that went up. Everything went up except for energy, and that's why the market ended up having that big crash that we saw. Now, right now, we're seeing lots of uncertainty. The market does not like uncertainty, and we're starting to see these treasury yields fall a bit as traders are awaiting Thursday's CPI report. So remember that. Uncertainty is something the market does not like, and we tend to see some sell-offs during times like that. Now, there are these big headlines coming out. Oh, economists think that inflation is going to be at a 40-year high and this and that. And if you don't know what CPI is, the simplest way to really talk about it is it's basically a measure of a rate of change in prices. It's an inflationary measure that's heavily accepted by investors and people all over the world. That's why it's so important. Now, as far as the overall value goes, we are seeing big changes being reported by these economists, and they are anticipating a increase in core CPI based off this data. So now I want to go more into the data from what the Bureau of Labor Statistics is saying. They are expecting an 8.1% rise from a year earlier, which is once again a bit of a slowdown compared to 8.3%, which is what we got in August. The data is coming out for September just tomorrow. And we had the last report from August, which was pretty hot. So they are expecting a slight cool off from there. However, CPI itself is not all we're looking at. The Fed does not have a major control over gas prices and food prices, and that's why we also look at the overall forecast. So if we exclude food and energy, core CPI is what it's known as, is forecasted to be at 6.4%. Now, I want to see how that really goes. It was 6.3% the last time it came out. So right now they are anticipating that this would actually go up a bit as expectations are a little bit high. Now, what I'm essentially seeing is the data is suggesting that core CPI overall is starting to actually come down a bit as we are starting to see it flatten here and there. What else is interesting is if you look at the data, overall CPI has been on a downtrend, the blue line right here, but core CPI excluding food and energy actually went up a bit in August. So I'm hoping we see this flatten out as well. Now, right now, there is one good thing that's coming out, and that's the fact that in September, gas prices actually came down a bit again. Now, remember, in July, they were pretty high. They actually came down a bit for the month of August, and the overall CPI did come down. Core CPI was still high, though, because, like I said, everything other than gas ended up going up. Now, it's coming down again. With gas prices coming down again, that's a good sign that overall CPI won't be as bad. Core CPI is still kind of uncertain, though, based off the data. So what does this data basically tell us about the markets and Tesla? Well, the expectation is 8.1%. We are expecting CPI to be at about 8.1%. And in my honest opinion, anything below 8%, so 7.5 or 7.9%, if that's the number that comes out, that's going to be pretty good for the markets. The market could see some green and a bit of a rally after that. Now, if we get 8 to 8.1%, that would be just okay. Not necessarily the best, because the market is anticipating this, and meeting expectations is just okay, but we'd still be in that 8% range, which is still not the best for this economy and the markets, and the Fed could still make comments about that. Now, if it's anything above expectations, 8.2%, 8.3% or higher, that's not going to be good for the markets whatsoever. Anything above 8.4% in my opinion, that's going to be very bad, and the market could actually crash if we get a big increase just like that. Now, this alone is not everything we have to watch for. There's also the core CPI data, or CPI excluding food and energy. The expectation is 6.4%. Now, in my honest opinion, anything from 6 to 6.2% would be pretty good. And anything from 6.3 to 6.4% would be okay. And I feel this way because, first off, 6.4% is the expectation for the month of September. But 6.3% was what we got for the month of August. So that would show that if we get like 6.3%, it would show that core CPI was just flat for the month, which is once again not great, but not bad either, which is why it's just okay. But anything above that, if it's like a little bit too high, like 6.4% would just be kind of like okay, 6.5% would be pretty bad, and anything above like 6.6%, that would be horrible for the markets, and we could see a crash after that. So how are you supposed to look at all this data? Here's the answer. You can't have any of these be bad for the markets. If one of them is good, so if CPI is like good, but core CPI is really bad, the market could still crash. We want both of them to be at least okay. That's what I'm really hoping for. My expectation, my prediction for CPI would be an 8% report, which could actually cause us to rally a bit, but depending on core CPI as well. I do believe that the overall CPI will come down thanks to gas prices dropping and energy prices coming down in the month of September. However, for core CPI, I'm more optimistic, and I'm hoping we actually see it at 6.2%, a slight drop compared to the last one we got. And I think this because of the fact that overall the data is showing that core CPI may be flattening from here. So I'm a little bit more optimistic. However, sometimes these predictions and expectations do not always get met. This means that you have to be prepared for anything. If both core CPI and CPI itself are bad, the market could take a big hit. If just one of them is bad, the market could also take a big hit. But if both of them are just okay, or even if both of them are like great, the market could go in the opposite direction. So I think this is going to be very important for how the market really ends up moving. And if there are still talks about a potential midterm election, rally, it is very possible for that to happen. But in order for it to happen, I think one of the big necessities would be a good CPI report where it's actually lowering and showing some signs of it flattening, which really brings in some more confidence into the markets. So that is essentially what I see in this video. If CPI comes out as better than expected, it's lower than what we would have anticipated, Tesla and the whole market could get a big rally and start to push up. And I wouldn't be surprised if Tesla breaks past 220. A break above that would give this the potential to retest 226, which we could actually break as well if there is enough volume and buying pressure coming in. Now, if it's bad, if the report is very bad, and we miss on expectations, CPI, or even just core CPI itself, if one of them is just too hot, the market is not going to like that. If it's way too hot, if CPI is too high, Tesla could start coming down with the overall market. We're going to retest 215. A break below that could cause us to retest 210. And that's where we enter that very critical zone between 210 and 206. If we don't get a nice bounce off this key zone, this thing has the potential to retest 200 flat. Once again, it depends very heavily on CPI. Now, I mentioned to you guys, I'm a little bit more bullish for tomorrow. I think we're a little bit more likely to see a better reading, but I don't want you guys to count on that. You have to be prepared for anything. Be prepared for what the data shows us. Now, my prediction for tomorrow for Tesla and the markets is a slight green day into like the open if we actually get a nice report, which I think we will, and we could actually start a big rally after that. I wouldn't be surprised if Tesla ends up retesting 226 if we get a good reading. Once again, it all depends on the data. So anyways, I hope that was as clear as possible. I want to thank you all so much for listening. Tomorrow's a very important day, so be ready at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time. It's going to have a big effect on the futures, the NASDAQ, the QQQ. Everything is really going to be affected by this, and the eyes will be on the Fed after this and what their policy changes end up enacting. Thank you all for listening. Have an absolutely fantastic rest of the day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Tesla to the moon because the long-term future is still incredibly bright, and peace out.